In People versus Robert Durst, Mr. Durst is present with Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Milius is at council table, and Mr. Bailey at the lectern. Mr. Liu and Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson are nearby. Our witness, Mella Kaufman, has resumed the witness stand. I'll remind you that you're under oath. And you may continue with your direct examination of the witness, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think when we broke, we were discussing, had you met Robert Durst before?
Yes.
Under what circumstances?
He would come visit.
Can you just speak up a little bit?
Yes, he would come visit.
Okay. And I have a photo, I marked this as People's 94.
Yes.
That's Susan, right?
Yes,
And who's the person she's got her arms around?
Bobby Durst.
Okay. And do you see Bobby Durst in the courtroom right now?
Yes.
Just point to him, please.
She gestured in his direction, identifying Mr. Durst.
Thank you. How many times would you estimate it is you met Mr. Durst?
A few.
Aside from meeting him, would Susan talk about Mr. Durst?
Yeah, it felt like I knew him just because he was such an important person in her life, and I heard so much about him.
What would she call him?
But name-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bobby.
Okay. What did Susan tell you about her relationship with Bobby? Like, in terms of how close they were?
Oh, yeah, best friend, adores him, like family.
What would Susan's demeanor be like when she spoke about her friend, Mr. Durst?
She would light up a bit.
Okay. Would she seem excited when you say light up? Would she seem
Yeah.
excited when she talked about him?
Yeah.
How, based on your discussions with Susan and you watching her demeanor when she spoke about him, how close were the defendant and Susan Berman?
I can only speak from what I saw on her side.
Yep.
Which was as close as much as she can care about a friend, as much as she could be close.
Okay. Did you know anything from Susan about Mr. Durst, the defendant's wife, Kathleen Durst?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions now. We'll strike that. Did Susan ever discuss with you any situation involving the defendant? Well, strike that, actually. I apologize, Your Honor. Did Susan ever talk to you about any situations involving any friends she had whose wives had gone missing?
Can we get a foundation as to time?
Yeah, clarify. Well,
Yeah,
narrow
well,
it down.
I just answer yes or no, and then I'll follow up with that.
Yes.
Yes.
She did?
Yes.
Okay. How old were you approximately when this conversation took place?
12 or 13 in there. Probably 13, 14, actually.
Okay. And this conversation that I'm going to ask you about obviously happened many years ago, right?
Yes.
And it happened when you were a teenager.
8th grade. Happened in 8th grade.
You were in 8th grade. Okay. So, as I'm asking you these questions, please let us know if you have trouble remembering certain things, or if you don't, and whether if if you remember certain parts of things and don't remember other parts of things, that's acceptable too. But just do your best just to be completely honest about what you remember from your own memories, okay?
Okay.
This memory that we're about to discuss, is this a memory that lasted with you throughout the years, or is it a memory that came back to you at a certain point in time?
I'd say it's a memory that if I had been directly asked, I would have immediately recalled. But without being asked, it did not come up when discussing Susan.
Okay. So, was this one conversation with Susan, or was this a series of conversations on this topic?
Probably the one. I mean, I'm sure it was maybe vaguely referenced, but not the most important piece of information about her friendship.
Okay. What was the context under which this discussion came up between you and Susan, to the best of your memory?
We went to the UCLA library to research a feminist interpretation of the Bible for my English class. And when we were leaving, I believe, we were on Sunset, and she was, it was just another interesting story she was telling me, and she was telling me about her friend and how his wife had disappeared and how she had been an alibi or made a phone call for him so that it wasn't suspicious. And she left it kind of like a cliffhanger. She left me in suspense, like, did he do it? And she kind of smirked and said, I don't know, what do you think, kind of thing.
Uh-huh. And was that typical or atypical of Susan as she would tell you things about her past, the way she told these events to you?
Typical.
What do you mean by that? Explain.
She was able to make, she was a storyteller. She was able to make stories exciting and interesting. She knew how to deliver them.
And at the time when she was saying this to you, did she use names of who was involved, or did she just refer to this as a friend?
Names.
Okay. Who was she talking about?
Bobby Durst and his wife, Kathleen.
Okay. Well, did she use the word Kathleen, or did she just say his wife?
I can't really remember at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the best of your memory, exactly what do you remember her saying?
I think I pretty much said it the best I can, which is, a suspenseful story involving her dear friend, Bobby Durst, and the history of their connection, and his wife going missing, and her stepping in, making a phone call, and leaving it as a suspense.
And you talked about it as a suspense. Was it all in just one stream, this version of events, or was it kind of drawn out over a period of time in the car?
It was, I'm guessing, but it was in one.
Okay.
It was in a 10-minute period,
And when you say you're guessing, you're doing your best to remember events that happened when you were like 14.
What I mean is, I can't give it a minute. I was going to try to give it like an exact minute of time. It was not a half an hour. It was not over a long drive. It was, I remember the stretch of Sunset Boulevard that we were on.
Based on your experiences with Susan Berman and what you knew about her, assuming that her friend Bobby had done something and involved his missing wife, would she hesitate to step in and make calls on his behalf to try to help him in the situation?
Sustained. Speculation. Don't answer.
If Susan, in the crises situations that you were involved in throughout your life growing up, where you saw her step in and help people out, was Susan the kind of person when she helped someone out, let's say she was going to call someone, assume, to try to help someone out of a situation, And let's say there's like 3 levels of people that she could call. Would Susan start at the bottom in terms of who she would call to try to help someone?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
I think it's vague. Sustain.
Let's assume you have a situation in your school. Were there situations in your school ever where Susan got involved in helping you out with issues you had at school?
Absolutely.
And let's say you had an issue at school with Susan and involved your teacher. Okay?
Yes.
Would Susan call the teacher, or would she call someone else?
No, she would go straight to the principal and try to get that teacher fired.
Okay. So based on your experiences with Susan, if she's going to help someone out of a situation by making calls, based on what you experienced personally, based on what you just described, is she the type of person who's going to hesitate to go into the top of the food chain?
Your Honor, assumes facts not evidence, calls for speculation.
I'll sustain it.
Thank you.
I see where you're going, but
Okay.
I don't think this is necessary.
I have anecdotal.
Don't even.
Oh, don't even.
Answer
Okay.
that. If he may ask you a related question, but not that one.
The way Susan Berman talked about who she called Bobby, her friend, did she ever speak negatively about him?
No.
Based on the Susan that you know and your experiences with her growing up, and given what you knew about how she spoke about Bobby and her feelings about Bobby, do you know of any reason, in your opinion, why Susan would say that he was involved to you with his missing wife, if that were not true?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overall.
No.
In fact, based on the experiences of Susan that you had and how she spoke about Bobby, if she was going to tell you a story involving her friend Bobby and involved his involvement with his missing wife, what would you expect her to do?
Your Honor, object. It's just asking the same question, asked and answered, the same question in a different form.
It's a different question.
It's definitely different, but it's the same.
Okay, let me look at that. Hold on a second.
I could be more specific if you'd like.
Let me, I got this wonderful technology here. I'm going to take
Yes.
advantage of it.
Thank you.
Let's see. Sustain the objection that it is vague.
Okay.
You may restate the
Thank you.
question.
I want you to assume in this hypothetical, the following hypothetical. I'm not telling you this is true. I just want you to assume it's true, okay?
Okay.
I want you to assume that Bobby Durst killed his wife, Kathleen Durst.
Okay.
All of your experiences growing up with Susan Berman, and given your experiences with her and what she told you about her relationship with Bobby and how she spoke with him, in your opinion, if she were going to tell you a story about him, would she have minimized or maximized Robert Durst's role in that crime?
I'm going to object.
Sustain.
Your Honor, we asked that there be a grounds when he says, I'm just going to object. He doesn't give any grounds.
It's so self-evident, I didn't think I had
Well,
to.
we would like grounds, Your Honor, as is legally required under the California Evidence Code, as well as the rules of court.
For your grounds.
Speculative.
Sustain.
vague.
Ms. Kaufman, as you sit here today, and I know it was a long time ago, I'm not asking you if you remember the exact words that were said, okay? But do you have any doubt in your mind that Susan Berman talked to you about Bobby and his missing wife?
None at all.
based on the conversation she had with you, did she say or imply that Bobby was involved in the disappearance of his wife?
Grounds, Your Honor.
Just,
Speculative. Your
yeah,
Honor.
sustain.
At the end of that conversation, did you know whether, based on what Susan told you, that Bobby Durst was involved with his missing wife, his disappearance of his wife?
It was heavily implied. I was not certain.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Overruled.
And when you say it was heavily implied, was this go along with the way Susan would tell this story to you and leaving it suspenseful?
Yes.
How certain are you that Susan Berman told you that she helped her friend Bobby with this situation by providing some sort of an alibi?
Completely.
Is there any doubt in your mind?
No.
When Susan was killed in 2001, were you interviewed by the police shortly thereafter?
Yes.
At that time you were interviewed, did you put two and two together or even think that her friend Bobby from this conversation all these years earlier was involved in Susan's death?
Your Honor, there's no grounds. We just want the same rules for us as for them. They get up, they say objection.
I can
There's no
rephrase the
grounds.
question, it's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Balian. Thank you for rephrasing the question.
Did you suspect at the time you spoke with the police back then, in your mind, Bobby Durst?
I wasn't,
Your Honor, it is.
Overruled.
Okay.
I was not in a place to connect or suspect anything. Susan was murdered and it was so traumatizing and overwhelming to me. And then I came down for her services and there was a big misinterpretation, or however you want to explain that, that I had stopped being her daughter, that I had cut off communication with her. And so I was excluded from the services. And at the after party, everyone came up to me and asked, like it was a gossip magazine, who do you think did it? Who do you think did it? So I left that experience back to Portland, Oregon, where I felt I would never think about it or go near anyone interested in it again.
I'm sorry to ask, but you left Susan Berman's funeral, it sounds like, with a pretty bad taste in your mouth.
Yes. Traumatized.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Mr. Chesnoff, you may cross-examine the witness.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Ms. Kaufman, I know this is difficult, and you've expressed that to us, but we need to ask you these questions so the jury can evaluate all of the facts and circumstances involved here. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay. And I also know it's probably difficult because it's a reminder of a lot of the dysfunction that you as a young person were subjected to that was beyond your control. So I get that. I want you to know that. We also need the jury to understand Susan.
Mr. Chesnoff,
Yes.
please raise your voice,
Oh, I'm sorry.
even with your soft
We're
words.
trying to be...
You need to project them.
Okay, so I'll repeat the last thing I said. I also know that this is difficult because in a lot of ways it reminds you of the dysfunction that you were unfairly subjected to as a young person.
I would not say that's accurate.
Excuse me?
I would not say that's accurate.
Okay. Well, you told us about your father, you told us about your birth mom abandoning you, correct?
Correct.
And then you also said that at a point in time your birth father had no contact with you.
Correct.
So when I was talking about dysfunction, that's what I was describing, but I'll move on,
That isn't what upsets me.
okay? We also need the jurors to understand Susan and what kind of person she was. So with that in mind, you've had a number of interviews over the years, have you not?
2.
Well,
Oh, 3.
okay, 4.
What's the 4th?
The original interview
Uh-huh.
that happened in March after Susan was murdered. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And then you spoke to the producers from the Jinx, a fellow named Mark Zmerling, correct?
Correct.
That's 2.
Yes.
Then Detective Romero flew to Portland and visited with you, correct?
Correct.
That's 3, correct?
Correct.
And then the 4th one is with Mr. Lewin by phone with Mr. Habib in September, I believe, of 2016. Remember that?
Yeah, I just didn't consider it an interview. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Mr. Lewin was asking a lot of questions, was he not?
Likely so.
Okay, and including the questions that Mr. Habib Balian just asked you concerning your conversation on Sunset, correct?
I don't have a clear memory.
Okay, we'll get to that. Do you remember telling people along the way that your memory of events during this time period when you were 12, 13, 14, were, as you described it, foggy? Remember that?
I don't remember saying that, but I'm sure it's true.
Okay. So you're 13 years old or 14. At one time you said this happened when you were 13. Just now in court you said it happened when you were 14. But it's fair to say, when you think about it, all the facts as to what happened are, as you described it previously, foggy, not clear, not detailed.
Not all.
Not all, but at least some, correct?
Some,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Susan is murdered in December, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, the police did not contact you, correct?
Correct.
Where were you living then?
I lived in Northeast Portland in an apartment.
Okay. And sometime later, in March of 2001, they do contact you, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and this has given you time between the murder and the upset at the funeral to collect your thoughts, correct?
No.
So in the January, February, 60, maybe it's close to 90 days. It's certainly 90 days from when you had the upset at the funeral, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the next meeting you have is in March 2013, which is with Mr. Smerling, who's a producer of the Jinx, correct?
Correct.
That's 12 years after the first discussion you had with the police in March of 2001, correct?
Correct.
And in your meeting with Mr. Smerling, you never discuss the conversation you claim happened at UCLA, do you?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And it's not really like a cold interview that you're having with Mr. Smerling. Didn't they kind of, I don't know, almost beg you to come and participate?
No.
Did your brother?
I was manipulated into it by my brother. I was extremely unwilling. I felt coerced. And it was further traumatizing, which I expressed to them. There was no prep, and I was uncertain if I was going to allow them to use any of it.
Okay. And also your half-sister suggested you participate too, is that right?
No, because my brother was involving my half-sister and her huge family out in New Hampshire, and I knew it was a ploy to get me involved because she has zero knowledge or connection. I then was willing to speak to them so they would stop. That was my deal. Stop involving her, because I felt there could be some danger for her and her family.
So you thought the fellows from the Jinx were manipulative and coercive and were pressuring you and members of your family, fair?
I would say it differently.
Well, you just said that, so...
I felt coerced by my brother. I don't know the degree to which the producers influenced him to do it that way. I would not be surprised.
But you flew to Colorado and met with them, did you not?
I did.
And did they pay for your trip?
Yeah.
I'm not asking you this because I know the answer. Did you receive any other compensation for participating?
Yeah, that definitely wasn't compensation, and no.
Okay. By the way, after Mr. Berman's death, and for a number of years, your brother, who also grew up with Susan, actually worked for Mr. Durst. Isn't that true?
Correct.
And that's after Ms. Berman was murdered, correct?
Correct.
And your brother and Mr. Durst had a continuing relationship, correct?
From what I understand, yes.
Did you ever tell your brother to stop working with Mr. Durst?
I stopped speaking to my brother altogether because he was working with Mr. Durst.
Okay. Did you ever tell him to stop?
When he approached my sister and her family, and he had gotten me to fly out there on the guise of mending our relationship, and instead suggested I join this documentary and involve my sister, I said very clearly, this is not safe and is not fair, and please do not include me or my sister and her family.
So the producers were manipulative, correct?
I didn't say that.
Well, do you feel they were? You just said that they got you out there under pretense.
My brother and they may have aided. I don't know, and I don't consider that necessarily manipulative as much as probably how those kinds of documentaries work in terms of getting people to participate.
Okay. And of course, your brother spent how many years with Susan?
From the time
how
until
old
she
was
died,
he? How old was he when he met Susan?
he was 13.
Okay, and he, through the years, even though he was kind of rambunctious, apparently, he spent time with Susan. Is that fair?
Yes, he lived with her for 2 years, but maintained a solid visiting relationship.
He was also exposed to Susan's behavior and how she acted, correct?
I don't know, actually.
Well, he lived in the house with you, correct?
They had very little contact. It was Susan and I.
Okay.
She stepped in for major, but he was an older boy. It was a different relationship.
Okay. It sounds like Susan kind of took over your life to some degree. Was that at the expense of you having girlfriends and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, she would definitely make me question my friendships and their motives.
So, if Susan wanted you kind of all to herself, correct?
Yes, and possibly wanted to prevent me from getting lost in a social life
Okay.
that could be harmful to me as a young child.
Or a normal social life that a teenager could enjoy, correct?
True, yes.
Okay, so that was kind of selfish of Susan, wasn't it?
Yes,
Okay, and to the point where Susan was more interested at that point in time what she felt was best for her at the expense of a 13 or 14-year-old young lady, correct?
I'd say that was often best for her. I'd say that her needs would take priority often. Yeah.
And she was a pretty tough cookie, wasn't she?
Yes.
Now, Detective Whalen and Detective Romero visit you on February 12th, 2015 in Portland. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And that was 14 years after Susan's death, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, you told these detectives who were investigating the passing of someone you considered your mom that she and Bob were great friends and that he had even come to visit when you guys lived in the house in Brentwood, correct?
Correct.
And then in September of 2016, Detective Camacho, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Balian have a phone conversation with you, correct?
Correct.
So those are the first time. That's the last time you spoke to authorities before coming to court here, correct?
Sorry, repeat that?
So that conversation in 2016, besides preparing you for your testimony here, was the last conversation of the 4 that we described, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the first time you talked to the police was in March of 2001, correct?
Yes, correct.
And you knew when you spoke to the police that they were investigating the murder of Susan Berman, correct?
Correct.
And you knew at the time that they spoke to you that no one had been arrested, correct?
Correct.
So you knew that these officers were doing their job and trying to figure out what happened to Susan, right?
Correct.
Okay. By the way, no police contacted you when you were at the funeral for Susan, did they?
While I was in town at the funeral?
Yes.
No, it was afterward.
Okay. When you spoke to the police in 2001, did you at any time make any mention of your conversation that you allegedly had with Susan while you were driving past UCLA on Sunset?
I don't recall.
Would it help you recall if I were to show you a copy of your interview?
Sure.
May I approach, Your Honor?
May.
Thank you.
We're talking to you.
This is LADA 035741.
And this is in what, 2012?
2001.
2001. Oh, okay.
Please take your time.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Has that helped refresh your recollection whether March 21st, 2001, when you were interviewed by Detective Coulter and Detective Stevens, that you never mentioned anything about your conversation that allegedly took place at UCLA?
Right.
It reminds
Correct.
that you did not.
I did not.
Okay. And at this time, how old were you in 2001?
I don't know. I gotta do the math. Hold on a second. 20 years ago, I was 25.
Okay, so, and you were in school, correct?
I had just finished school.
College?
Just finished college, yeah, a year or two prior, I guess.
So you had high school education, then you went to a very good college and graduated. University. Up about whether Susan would open the door at her house. And you said that there may have been situations where she opened the door for someone she didn't know. Is that true?
Sure.
Do you remember Mr. Durst coming to the house in Brentwood and staying with you?
I don't think he stayed with us at that house. I think he stayed with us at the other Brentwood house, but he came to the Old Loma place.
Take a second.
Sorry. I think maybe he came and we all went out to dinner from there once. I don't have a clear memory.
Thank you. Do you remember when Detective Romero was questioning you about Kathy Durst's disappearance, and you recited to him that Susan told you, "We don't know, we still have nothing to this day, we haven't found her"? You remember telling that to the detectives?
That's the way I would have explained the suspenseful ending, yes.
So when you were reciting that, that was because Susan Berman had told you that she disappeared, correct?
Correct.
And that no one had ever found her, so that they didn't know the end of the story. Is that fair?
Yes.
Do you remember the policeman telling you that listening to the producers from the Jinx was kind of a dangerous thing to do? Remember that?
I don't.
Okay, they told you that
Objection, relevance, would also be hearsay.
they are probably telling you a lot of things that they shouldn't be telling you. Do you remember that?
That rings a bell.
Okay, so the police were warning you that the producers of the Jinx could possibly be telling you things that would interfere with their actual investigation, correct?
I don't know that I really was absorbing what the point was.
Okay. Does it sound like a logical point to not have TV
Sure.
producers talking to you when the police are investigating a crime?
The producers had already spoken to me.
Right, but they were warning you about
It was an
continuing.
unnecessary warning because I wasn't in communication with the producers after my interview.
Okay. But the purpose of the warning was so that you would not be improperly influenced, correct? I'm not suggesting you were, because you were smart
That's
enough.
That sounds logical.
As to why the officer gave the warning.
Okay, I think the question is whether you understood the question of be imparting that idea to you. Were they saying that to you?
They were saying that, and it makes sense to me that that would be the point of them saying that, and at the time it didn't feel relevant or I didn't comprehend.
I remember when you were giving Mr. Bailey an example of Susan, Miss Berman, helping someone who was in trouble with the law. And you referenced the situation with Sarah, correct?
Yes.
So, like many parents, her son got in trouble.
Yes, I would have liked to share other anecdotes, but that was the easiest one to grab.
Okay, well, on this particular one dealt with her helping someone that, at least in her mind,
Helping her son.
like
Yeah.
a son.
Yes.
Okay, so it is not unusual in any way for a parent to help a teenage son who's in trouble with the law, correct?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Should not be.
And in fact, it was a much better response than the one that his birth father gave, which was basically let him rot.
Yeah, birth father said he needs to change his name, so I'm not associated with him.
Okay, but Susan Berman, not out of some crazy mafia loyalty, but out of parental love,
Sure,
helped your brother.
sure, yes.
By the way, you said Susan takes control. Is that right?
Yes,
And she had experience with the press, did she not?
yes.
She'd worked for New York Magazine, I believe.
San Francisco Chronicle, maybe, New York Magazine, something like that.
So she had a lot of experience with how at that time, no social media, but media worked, correct?
Media, yeah.
So it would not have been unusual in a circumstance where someone that she cared about was being harassed by the press, that as someone who was savvy with the media, that she might step in and try to help that person, correct?
Towards an end of manipulation, I don't know that she altruistically stepped into roles of service as much as she fixed problems.
Okay, well, like for example, when your brother had a problem, she stepped in, she got one lawyer, she didn't like him because she didn't think he was doing the right job. She got somebody else, and that guy did a great job, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so now she has a friend who's being harassed by the press, and she has experience with the press, and so she steps in and does her job helping that person because that fella has no experience with the press.
sure.
And actually, from your experience with Mr. Durst, he's kind of a withdrawn fella, isn't he?
Very.
Not expressive, correct?
Correct.
Actually hard to talk to.
Yes,
And that was always your experience with Mr. Durst, correct?
correct.
Not, okay.
There was not any warmth. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the dogs again. If the dogs knew someone that they liked, for example, they wouldn't go crazy, would they?
I don't know. I think if I knocked on the door, they'd probably go absolutely insane.
But weren't there times when there were people in the house?
Yes, so she would separate them into separate rooms, get the person there, let one out that would bark, and she'd have to calm it, and they'd acclimate, and the one would sit with her and visit.
Okay, so there would come a point in time where if there was someone that Susan liked that was in the house, at least one of the dogs would sit there like a loyal dog,
Yes.
okay? And did she rotate which dog was going to be the
She wasn't that fair about
Fla-
rotating them.
flavor of the day?
Yeah, somewhat.
Courts and orders again, Your Honor. Your Honor, can I ask the court a favor? Could we break for lunch? That way I can not take time and be...
All right, I'll take that invitation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we'll take our break until 1:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Do not discuss your testimony with any other witness. And you can remain